Again, we want to thank all of you for coming and visiting us today, being a part of this event, learning all you can about and getting information, learning about fentanyl. Okay, this is our judicial panel, which is very interesting. Before I go too far, though, I did want to mention that Zoctil Campos Biggs from Teresa Ledger Fernandez's office is here. So again, the eyes and ears of the lawmakers are here, and that's what we want. Speak to your lawmakers. Speak to those in charge. That's how we get things changed, right? Okay. Heading up this panel again, someone from the community. We've asked another one of the anchors here in town, Danielle Todesco. She has a very big interest in this. She has a child like many of you and many of us. So she wants to learn about this. She got involved, and that's what it's all about. So Danielle, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Tom. First, I want to start with how many of you have already learned so much today, right? Jaw-dropping information in that last panel. And as he mentioned, I have a 9-year-old at home, and I've already annoyed her with the discussion when the rainbow fentanyl came out, and so she's going to be very annoyed with me after today. But we've got to have those conversations. So we have the judicial panel, and let's take a look at who has taken their time. Very busy people we have here today. We have Bernalillo County District Attorney Raul Torrez. Give a wave for us. We have Matthew Chavez with the Public Defender's Office here. We have Shana Long. She's with the U.S. District Attorney's Office. That's Judge Cindy Leos in the blue. We have Judge Jennifer Wernersbach. And we have Judge Alma Christina Roberson. And we have the Chief Judge for Metro Court, Maria Dominguez. Thank you for joining us. I want to start with DA Torrez because we had the discussion with law enforcement and what they're seeing out on the streets, what they're encountering, and then they bring these cases to you. What are you seeing?
Well, I think what you're seeing inside the criminal justice system and across law enforcement is the steady replacement of fentanyl in the place of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and other drugs. In the last probably year and a half to 2 years, we have seen the real explosion of the very potent and highly cheap fentanyl pills that are flooding the marketplace. And what that is doing is not only having a profound impact on our public health system, leading to skyrocketing levels of overdose deaths in the community, but also having a significant impact on the dynamic nature of the drug trade and drug trafficking here in the community. For our part, we focus on trying to do 2 things at the same time. Number one, working with our federal partners to identify high-level drug trafficking organizations that are engaged in not only selling narcotics, but a lot of violent crime in the community. But number 2, trying to identify lower-level property offenders, people with substance abuse disorders, people who are arrested for possession of a controlled substance, and if there is no history of violence or other extensive criminal history, what we try to do is move them either into our pre-prosecution diversion program, which we've tried to grow by about 200% in the last 2.5 years, and also work with our stakeholder partners to engage in drug court. Unfortunately, we have an underutilization of both pre-prosecution diversion and drug court right now inside the system, and so that's the area where I think most of our frontline prosecutors are spending most of their time, is trying to figure out how we can get some of these lower-level folks with substance abuse disorders out of the criminal justice system into a therapeutic framework and into a place where we can help them recover, get their lives put back together, and stop having contact with the criminal justice system.
I want to follow up because you say an aversion to it from the person themselves?
So what we're trying to do is to divert people out of what is the mainline traditional criminal justice system, which there is certainly a place for that in the criminal justice space in terms of using incarceration to deter different types of criminal activity. But what we recognize is that substance abuse disorders are best dealt with up front by access to treatment, access to counseling, therapy, and alternatives to incarceration, because we have lower recidivism rates, we have better health outcomes, we have less contact with the criminal justice system. They consume fewer police resources, they engage in less criminal activity, and it not only saves lives, it saves money, and it improves the system across the board. But it's very difficult to try and get people into a diversion program given the current structure of our system. And so we work a lot at the policy level to kind of think differently about the incentives that we've created in that system, but also what kind of additional resources we need to have so that when people are there and they're in custody but they want help, we can provide that help and make this a safer community and help them regain control over their lives.
Matthew Chavez, Public Defender's Office. I want to see what you're seeing from the people who you guys deal with on a daily basis.
Thank you for that question, and it's really good to see so many familiar faces here. It's an extremely important issue. It's, the Public Defender's Office is on the front line of this, just as Raul's office is, and it's affecting everyone, even our employees' families. It's extraordinarily sad and troubling to see. It really has taken over what DA Torrez has said. Is it's really, we're seeing a replacement of traditional drugs with fentanyl, and of course we hear it directly from our clients, and they're asking for our help. I mean, that's the number one. Their number one concern is to get better, to kick this habit that they have and get their life back together. And so we feel that we are the tip of the spear on that. We provide an enormous amount of services. We connect people with services in the community, and we take this very seriously. And so our appeal is to better fund the system, because we have social workers that drive our clients around Albuquerque, and they're trying to find a bed. They're trying to find an available bed for one of our clients that are severely ill, and they can drive around for hours going to all the familiar places, all of our service providers. There's just not enough, and so we really need to see a dramatic increase in the services for folks that are addicted. And so that's our mission. Our core mission is to defend the constitutional rights of our clients, but dovetailing with that is we don't want to see our clients again. We want them to get help and get free of this addiction.
We heard in the last panel from the Office of the Medical Investigator that a lot of these people may not even know that they have had fentanyl. Are you seeing that with the clients that you see?
Yes, and I mean we might even be a few steps back because there are other fentanyl issues. There's I don't know if folks have heard of tranq, the fentanyl cut with horse tranquilizers. I think it's xylazine. There's also benzo dope, which is fentanyl cut with benzodiazepines. And so it's really evolving over time. The shifting sands on this are very hard to track. But yes, I mean our clients, they've fallen victim to the same things that we heard about earlier this morning. Thinking that they're taking one substance and they're actually taking fentanyl, and they overdose, and it's really ravaged those communities.
Let's go to Shana Long. She's with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I would imagine that you have a much different goal. Rather than connecting people with services to get out of addiction, you're dealing with maybe the bigger cases, the bigger criminal charges.
Yeah, that's correct. And I want to thank everyone for having us here in this important discussion. So the role of the U.S. Attorney's Office in all of this is, if we're doing our job right, is we're focusing on the large-scale drug trafficking organizations. So we have a very experienced group of prosecutors who are dedicated to organized crime. We employ all sorts of long-term investigative techniques wiretaps, and other sorts of fun stuff to try to infiltrate and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. So with that, the goal is that we're not trying to target the street-level dealers as a drug case. What we're trying to do is work our way up the chain to the people that are making money and benefiting off of other people's addiction. So that is the goal. And in terms of, we have some hurdles and some trends, and we'll discuss that in a little bit probably, but ultimately, if we're doing our job right, we're getting the people who are profiting off of addiction. We are seizing their assets, so the cars and the houses and the bank accounts, because a lot of the drug traffickers that I've interfaced with in my career, they know they're going to federal prison. Like, there is an assumption, once you get to a certain level, you know you're probably going to get caught if we can get to you if you're not in Mexico. So really the question is, how much of their stuff can we take? And so that is where we put a lot of resources in terms of seizure of drug proceeds that were placed into homes, vehicles, baseball cards was one of my recent seizures. So that's really kind of an important aspect of this discussion with what is one part of this ongoing crisis. Obviously, I think everyone here today knows we're not going to prosecute our way out of this crisis. So we're doing what we can in our limited resources to work up to the people that are most responsible and, in my view, criminally culpable. But of course, if there's demand, supply and demand works in every community and every type of capitalistic society, and that's true for drugs. So we can dismantle and take down, and when the demand is as high as it is, it gets replaced. So that's one aspect. The other thing that we've been really focused on, and Alex Ubaez is our U.S. attorney, he's here. I told him he should Sharpie this out and come sit here, but he didn't. But the other aspect is violent crime. So I think everyone in this room has been touched by violent crime, probably closer than you would like in your community, especially for those of us who are from here, where we feel like it didn't used to be that way, and it is now. And so we are trying to put what is really limited resources into, and as DA Torrez mentioned, the most violent offenders. I will state that even the most violent offenders, the people with the drugs and the guns, typically hand in hand, a lot of our non-drug related offenses are drug related. So a lot of times people are high on drugs, or it's over drugs, like Commander Hartsock mentioned. So drugs is kind of the theme that I think cuts across all levels of criminal justice. It depends on kind of how you look at it and the type of case. So I would say it touches on everything, but really it's large-scale drug trafficking organizations and then our community's most violent offenders. That is what our goal is in prosecution.
You talked about local traffickers, local seizures. How much of that is local here in the metro, and how much of it is out of the state, out of the country?
So we are a hub of a lot of things. The Balloon Fiesta is one. The other is lots of drugs from Mexico. So Phoenix and El Paso, it's a very common route to come through Albuquerque. So one of our focus is we try to focus on what's impacting our community in the role of drugs and violence, but it's also to work out and have a regional impact. That is really important, and international. So we are heavily involved in trying to extradite defendants from Mexico. That is a large part of what we do, to try to bring them to the United States. That could be a separate summit on its own, right, in terms of the complications that can present. But we certainly try to focus on our own communities as well as the regional impact. I would note that our rural communities are really underserved at every level, but especially in terms of what's happening with fentanyl. And so that is something that trying to work these long-term investigations in the rural communities is something we're trying to focus on as well.
Let's go to Judge Cindy Leos. We know that this is exploding now. We're seeing huge exponential growth in the prevalence of fentanyl in our community. What are you seeing, and how long have you been seeing it, even with, I think it says, a young adult court?
Sure, thank you. So I want to, first of all, thank you so much for having me present at this summit. I think it's so important that we're really opening the discussion and bringing in so many people that are seeing this on the ground floor. So I am, along with Judge Montano, run a diversion program here in Albuquerque called Young Adult Court, and it's for young people 18 to 25 years old with pending felony charges. And we started this program in 2017, so we've been around for about 5 years, and we've had numerous graduates and a very low recidivism rate. So we're not seeing a lot of our graduates pick up new felony charges after they've completed this tough program. So in 2019 is when we first started to become aware that fentanyl was out there, and it was early 2019. And it was brought to our attention by one of the young people in our program, one of their family members, mentioning that this person was using. Unfortunately, at the time, the drug testing that we were doing did not specifically test for fentanyl because we were unaware of it. And lo and behold, we started adding that test to our urinalysis test, and we were finding that some of our participants were indeed using fentanyl. So we changed our program, and we started routinely testing for that drug. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the past 3 years is that what was seen in 1 or 2 participants is now seen in a lot more. And so what we're seeing trending with the young people in our community is tracking with what we're hearing today at this summit. It's a major problem. And so, you know, we're trying to, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, about how we're specifically addressing that addiction within young adult court. But just being mindful that it's being used out there was our first step.
Let's go to Judge Roberson. I have a question about childhood addiction and what you're seeing.
So, thank you. So, drug use has certainly become much more dangerous now. I have some numbers actually that I would like to share. In 2010, there were 518 deaths among children because of overdose, 518. In 2019, there was 492. In 2020, that number jumped by 94% to 954 deaths. In 2021, it was 1,146. And so certainly we're seeing a rise of fentanyl use in children's court. And there are some survey studies that seem to show that during the pandemic, drug use didn't become more prevalent among our children, but certainly those overdose rates are incredibly frightening.
Can you distinguish between which overdose deaths were like a baby that had somehow accidentally obtained that and like teen use or even elementary age use?
So these numbers are teen use.
They're teens, okay. And so tell us more about what you're seeing in the family court system.
So in family court, we deal with delinquency, which I think is what the public is more familiar with, but the majority of the cases that I hear are abuse and neglect cases. And from those, the majority are neglect cases, and these are cases where parents are dealing with addiction and are no longer a safe place for their children. And it is heartbreaking to see a baby taken away from its parents. You know, this is a critical time for bonding between children and their parents when they're newborn, and they miss out on really important emotional development, physical development even. These are babies that are waking up in a stranger's arms. These are babies, that are used to seeing and hearing and seeing certain people, and that's just gone. It is extremely traumatizing for newborns and babies, but it's also really hard on older children. You know, they understand that their parents are addicted, but they don't always understand the complexities of addiction, and they internalize that, and they think that it's their fault, and they think that their parents don't love them enough. And that's far from the truth, because, I see it in court, parents are trying, these adults in their lives are working, and the love that they have for their children is really undeniable. And sometimes, we see successes and parents are able to get to a safe space, these parents that are dealing with addiction. And it is really the highlight of my day, my week, my month. But sometimes after what's a really long time in the eyes of a child, their rights are terminated. So drug addiction, fentanyl is certainly tearing apart families.
Let's go to Judge Jennifer Wernersbach. Forgive my ignorance. Tell me what drug court is and how that works.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you also for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. It is breathtaking how quickly fentanyl has taken over what we are seeing in drug court as the most typical drug that we see. But drug court essentially is a diversion program as well. It can be entered into sometimes while your charges are pending, but typically after you've pled to charges to divert from a sentence. And it involves 4 phases. It is meant to be about a year, but it can be much longer if you're not earning your weeks in each phase. And it involves treatment, community service, group therapy, medically assisted treatment like methadone, Suboxone type substances if necessary, working with people to get housing vouchers, rides around town, getting to treatment, really helping people to get on their feet, get stable, learn how to become sober, and then help them integrate back into their lives with all the stressors and triggers and things that come with that, with this new knowledge of how to hopefully do it sober.
How has fentanyl changed drug court?
Well, I will say, like I said, I think now we're seeing when people are testing positive, it's almost always involving fentanyl. Sometimes other substances too, but almost always fentanyl is in there. And I'm sure this has been talked about already, but it's cut into so many other drugs, as we've talked about, that people don't even know sometimes that they're taking fentanyl, and so they're getting hooked in a manner that they're not even fully aware of, which makes it really difficult to meet their treatment needs. It's very hard for clinicians to tell, when they're reaching signs of overdose or more risk, because the people themselves don't even know exactly what they're taking, how much they're taking. It's hard to manage how much like methadone or Suboxone dosage is safe, because fentanyl is so much more addictive and you need so much more to maintain that high. It's very tricky to get a right dosage in that regard. Clinicians are very afraid there's a lot more overdosing and risk of overdosing, and trying to, intervene in a timely manner is really tricky because there's so much unknown about it.
Can you talk about how successful drug court is and how often you're seeing the same people?
So we do have a low recidivism rate as well. If people graduate drug court, I believe our recidivism is less than 5%. That said, I've seen a couple of people who've done it, back in the 90s, say, or the early 2000s, who continued, tried to get sober, but got back into it, and they're back in our program. But, I've seen some people really succeed very quickly, and it does have to come from within. I mean, we impose these treatment strategies and counselors, but there really is something that comes from within each person, which makes them successful at this time in their lives or not. And not everybody's ready for it, even when it's imposed upon them. And so we try to create those incentives to create that change, but it's not always successful. But when it does take, and our program is quite successful for the people who graduated.
Let's talk to the Chief Judge for Metro Court. That is Maria Dominguez. Thanks for being here. Tell me what you're seeing with our criminal justice system here in the Metro.
And thank you for having me. As many of you know, the Metropolitan Court is probably the busiest, or is the busiest court in the state of New Mexico. We handle all misdemeanors, anything less than 364 days, as well as all preliminary hearings. Every case that felony or misdemeanor, for the most part, is initiated in Metro Court. So we touch almost every aspect at the very beginning of the criminal justice system. So that's why I feel that Metro Court and along with the justice partners play a key role, because we can intervene early. But what I've seen is, again, like Jennifer or Judge Wernersbach and Judge Leos have said, the increased numbers of positive for fentanyls for the individuals that we have on probation and pretrial services is just skyrocketing, where it's the main drug right now, rather than meth or THC, which is legal now, but as far as the drug testing. So we are testing, and of course that's something that Judge Leos mentioned, is making sure that we're appropriately testing. So we have seen that increase. Also, we handle a great number of arrest warrants and search warrants, and I would have to say in the last month, almost every arrest warrant or search warrant that I've handled involved fentanyl. So it is a huge problem, and we need to do what we can. I think we're already kind of behind the game, but we all need to collaborate, work together, work through these problems, and that's what I see.
I think this summit is a great first step, right? That our community is doing that maybe other places in the rest of the country are not doing, which is surprising to me. But are there other things that you're seeing other parts of the country do that you think we should try here?
Yes, absolutely. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and research, and there are opioid intervention courts already throughout the United States. The first one started in 2017 in Buffalo, New York. There are already guiding principles for an opioid intervention court. And the way to think of that is, rather than having a new type of court, it is considered an emergency room drug court, where intervention is done at the beginning, and the focus, and when I say the beginning, is upon arrest or prior to arrest, where the focus is on saving that person's life. That's the bottom line, making sure that they can live. It's not about where their case goes or anything else. The priority of that individual and the purpose of them being there is to make sure that they will survive to see another day.
We had heard from the last panel the connection that law enforcement is seeing with fentanyl and violence. I want to talk to DA Torrez about that. What are you guys seeing as far as these cases being connected?
Well, I think one of the most common things that we see on the streets is the prevalence of young people drug trafficking and firearms in, combining in unpredictable and pretty dangerous environments. And that's not unique necessarily to fentanyl, but the fact that it is so addictive and the fact that it is so cheap and its distribution brings such high profits to these drug trafficking organizations. Look, if you're in the drug game and you're out dealing fentanyl or anything else and you're worried about getting ripped off, you can't necessarily call the cops when that happens. So what happens? You arm yourself, right? So you're going to show up late in the night with no police around, and someone's got a lot of drugs and someone's got a lot of cash, and usually both parties have guns, and that is a very dangerous mix. And so one of the things that we try to emphasize when we focus on things like pretrial detention is the presence of a firearm. For example, we place a heavy emphasis on whether or not the parties are armed when they're, if they're getting picked up for a drug transaction, because of the connection between the presence of a firearm and a lot of these gun-related homicides. But beyond the violence that happens sort of in the context of drug trafficking, there is a lot of dangerous behavior by people once they're under the influence of fentanyl. A lot of people become victims of sexual assault or domestic abuse. They engage in domestic abuse. And so you have to understand that there are a lot of potential violent dynamics that are associated with the use of any drug, but a drug this addictive, this cheap, this readily available, and this profitable is going to present a real challenge for any community and for any law enforcement system.
So we are seeing fentanyl and firearms going hand in hand, and Shana had mentioned that as well. I want to talk about the partnership that you have with the U.S. Attorney's Office in bringing those cases to that federal level.
Yeah, our office has the biggest and longest standing relationship with the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I used to work, in specifically focused on the nexus between drug trafficking and firearms, or being a felon in possession of a firearm. And so we take a lot of the cases that involve serious violent offenders, people with lengthy criminal histories, and we send them over to a unit of, they're actually prosecutors that work for us, work in the district attorney's office, but are cross-designated as special assistant United States attorneys, so we have the ability to go into state court or federal court. We tend to take them into federal court for those firearm offenses when we know that we are going to have a greater certainty of both their detention and longer sentences imposed on the back end.
Shana, do you want to add to that, Shana?
I think in terms of, so my last job was intake of these cases in terms of the focus being drug trafficking, and I'll say that I think the partnership between the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Albuquerque is really important to having that level of communication to make sure that, I mean, listen, New Mexico, everyone knows, sorry, but New Mexico knows that the state courts are maybe, we have some issues in terms of sentences and detention and whatnot at the state level. The federal court, we do have higher success rate in detention. We have some pretty significant mandatory minimums. And so it's a matter of us working closely with the DA's office to make sure that we're using those resources and actually trying to select the people that are going to have the most community impact. I mean, if we're doing it right, that's what we should be doing. So having that long-standing effective relationship, I think, has really helped that, and the people that are doing the work and reviewing the cases do a very good job of making sure that they're flagging those type of offenders.
I think one of you, maybe it was Shana, had mentioned that fixing this crisis is pretty limited as far as the judicial system. One of the judges, I'd love to hear from you guys what you think that a solution can come from your end.
Well, I'm happy to jump in and plug young adult court a little bit more. So as DA Torrez mentioned, you know, one of the things we need to focus on is diversion. And so it's okay. You want some of my water? That's always my worst fear, is I'm going to choke like that. Are you okay, Jenny? Okay. So we have to recognize that incarceration certainly is something that's always on the table. You know, when we're talking about drug use, but incarceration should not be our default every time when someone is using. So in young adult court, it's a treatment court. And so we are offering treatment. And so when someone is using drugs, fentanyl, instead of just immediately defaulting to incarceration, we default to treatment. And as Judge Wernersbach talked about, we divert to inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, sober living arrangements, detox. We get them support in the community with case management services. We partner with multiple community providers, including UNM, Adobe, CNM, YDI, because we're still dealing with a very young population. And, you know, before we even consider what the appropriate diversion would be for any particular participant, we actually look at that actual participant. And we treat them like the individual that they are, that we all are. And we also recognize that they are young, and that the neuroscience shows that the human brain does not fully form until we are 25. And if we all look back to our, you know, our teenage years going into our mid-20s, we all probably made some decisions that we wouldn't make today now that we're older. And that's not an accident. That's just not because we're foolish. It's because our brains aren't fully formed. We don't understand risk. We don't understand that there's going to be consequences yet because our brain hasn't fully formed. So in young adult court, like the drug court model, we look at diversion. We look at how can we get people services in the community. That doesn't mean we won't incarcerate. We absolutely do incarcerate our participants sometimes. That would be when it's not just drug use, but there's something else going on. Maybe they were arrested on another charge. Maybe they're not complying with the program in other aspects. Or maybe there's just no option but to send them to the detention center to do ATP or the addiction treatment program and then get them into inpatient care. So we need to be progressive in the way we're approaching it, because the way we've been doing it is not going to work. And so programs like Judge Wernersbach drug court program and my young adult court is the way we're going to move forward through this.
And Matthew, you had mentioned that you also help connect your clients with those services. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So I couldn't agree more with Judge Leos that, I mean, first of all, we can't incarcerate. I think it was Senator Ben Ray Lujan set us off, framed the issue really nicely this morning by saying we the research has established that, incarcerating people that are addicted does not help. It actually exacerbates their circumstances and feeds into the roots of addiction that lead them to use drugs and then possibly commit crimes or whatever it is that flows from that. And so we're sort of on the back end of that. Our clients walk in the door, we meet them at the jail. They're already kind of in a bad situation in their lives. They've hit rock bottom. And so at that point, we do what we can. We have an incredible team of social workers and attorneys, staff, paralegals, and they connect folks with services. Our social work director, Casey Quirk, is brilliant. I'm sure a lot of folks in this room know her, and she's an incredible person, and that's what we do. So we do that for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. We try to help our clients get free of their addictions, and that is our priority. And so I just want to say though that someone mentioned something about rural New Mexico and the lack of services and the lack of options, and that is absolutely correct. I spent 5 years in the 12th Judicial District. There's a lot of really great leadership there and really dedicated public servants that are doing their best, but the resources are really lacking. And there's 2 jails in that district, 2 county jails, and at the time that I was the district defender there, neither of them had any significant addictions treatment in the jail, which I think is absurd. And coming here to the second district, it's a little bit better, but we still have a lot of work to do, and I think we should really dedicate ourselves, redouble our efforts to increase those services.
We have lawmakers listening. We know the session is coming up in January. What needs to change? What would you tell them from anyone?
Okay, I'll take the lead.
It's a lot.
We need more resources. We need to, as I mentioned when I was last speaking, sometimes our only option is to incarcerate someone until we can get them a bed. And that's not ideal. We know that there are drugs circulating at the jail. And so even though there's a thought that if you send somebody to jail, they're going to get clean, that's not the reality of this situation. So we will incarcerate people, like I mentioned, because we don't have any other options. We have a 3-month waiting period for a residential treatment program. Or the particular detox program we want to send them to. They've had problems with this particular participant has had a problem in the past and they can't get in there. There's just so many roadblocks that are frequently thrown up when we're trying to get somebody into the appropriate treatment. So if I had to ask for something, at least for my program and for the courts in general, I would say we need more resources generally.
Chief Judge, maybe you have something to add?
And I agree with Judge Leos. We do need more resources. And along the same lines, we need immediate access to resources, and less red tape, of course, and less bureaucracy, because we need to be able to divert people into inpatient treatment immediately rather than 3 months from now. And then also, the issues of transportation. How are we going to get that person from the jail to the treatment center and ensure that they're there? So just the most basic of resources as far as we need more treatment more inpatient treatment, and the availability to have access to them immediately.
DA Torrez, what does your office need?
Well, I think it's beyond resources. I think everyone here, I haven't met a judge, a district defender, a district attorney, or a cop, or a substance abuse provider or a social worker who's ever said they've got enough resources. That's not in the nature of the work that we do. I think we clearly need more inpatient treatment facility. We need outpatient treatment facilities. We need to have a warm handoff from the people who, who are not going to stay in jail, but, we have made no serious efforts to try and provide housing or transportation or the kind of supports that they need. And yet, and here's the difficult part, so I'll say the difficult part out loud. You need resources and you need accountability, okay? There needs to be more accountability across the board in the system. I mentioned the fact that I've doubled the capacity of the pre-prosecution diversion program in this county. And right now the acceptance rate is less than 30%. Why? If the prosecutor in this jurisdiction is offering to divert somebody out of jail and into treatment, why aren't they accepting that treatment? It's not a resource problem. It's a structural problem. And it has to do with the incentives that we create inside the criminal justice system. And so I am all for more resources so long as accountability for all of us is included in that.
And if I could just add, I am a drug court judge. I also sentence other people who may or may not be in drug court. And I will say that it's not always the defendant who's not willing as much as the state or the attorneys, particularly the state most frequently, who is opposed to diversion because they feel they want jail. So I think there's a lot of miscommunication about what these programs do. I hear Mr. Torrez saying he's trying to increase that participation, but I haven't seen that in the line attorneys that appear before me on a daily basis. So.
Judge, in the last quarter, I have 150 open diversion offers that haven't been accepted.
Interesting.
And I mean, I don't know how to elevate that for the court to see it, but I want the community to know that there are people we are trying to divert from this system and trying to get help that aren't getting help. And it isn't the fault of prosecutors, and it isn't lack of resources. There's a structural problem in this system that needs to change.
Well, so what do you mean by that? Spell it out for us.
Well, we hear a lot about law enforcement and prosecutors being unwilling to participate in a diversionary framework that takes nonviolent people and offers to get them treatment and help. I can't explain why those offers are rejected, but I think part of the issue has to do with the lack of predictability about what will happen inside the formal system in Bernalillo County. And I live in a jurisdiction that, despite the fact that we subsidize participation in these programs, despite the fact, and most of you may not know this, I was the first jurisdiction in this state not to require the admission of guilt for a substance abuse conviction. The only prosecutor in this state to do that. And yet the enrollment for pre-prosecution diversion in this county trails every other county in the state. Why? And I wish I had an answer, but I don't have an answer. But what I can tell you is it's not for lack of willingness to participate in that kind of framework.
Judge Wernersbach or Judge Leos.
If I could just jump in, there's a distinction here that I think is important to point out. So what DA Torrez is talking about is the PPP program that's run through the DA's office, which is very different from the programs that Judge Wernersbach and I do, which is run through the court. So I can tell you from my perspective at young adult court, right now we have about 35 participants. We have about 8 people that are in the screening process that have to basically work hard to be inducted in the program. And I'm sure that Judge Wernersbach's numbers are pretty close to what we're seeing at young adult court. Now, that's different from the PPP program that DA Torrez is talking about. Like I said, that's run through the DA's office. That has nothing to do with the court. I can tell you from the court's perspective and from my perspective with young adult court, we are always scrambling to get buy-in, to get more people in my program. Always.
We just hit the time. Tom, do you want us to keep? Okay. Why don't we open it up to folks out in the audience? If you have any questions, we have him with a microphone ready to take those.
Hi, I just want to agree with the judges. From being a convicted felon myself, many years prison does not work for anyone that's addicted to drugs. The lifestyle, anything that, it's just like a network of more and more resources. Instead of correcting us, it's like you're doing us a favor. So if we could get more people that, like myself and other women and men that are here that are recovering addicts, to give hope, because there is hope. We do change, and if the system would just stop seeing us as a number or as our past, and start seeing us as a member of this community, then other people would actually want to change. But when this door keeps getting shut in your face when you're trying to change and you get out and you have a felony and it's like you can't even get a job, what else do? You got to survive.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. That takes a lot of courage to stand up in front of this group and do that. We had another question over here.
I'm still a little bit confused, Mr. Torrez. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by structural? Because there seems to be a bit of a difference from where the courts are at and you're at. So please, can you elaborate more on structural and what that means?
Well, take a couple of the programs that you have. You have programs like PPD, which are pre-prosecution diversion, which Judge Leos correctly points out does not involve the court. It's an offer from the district attorney's office to go under what is essentially extended supervision in our office, access to treatment, regular drug testing, things of that nature. It is generally considered to be the earliest, the least consequential, the most supportive alternative program for people suffering from addiction issues. When we first tried to expand that program, first we were told people wouldn't enroll because they didn't have money. So we paid for it. Then we were told people wouldn't enroll because they had to admit their guilt of possessing a controlled substance. So I eliminated that. And yet the acceptance rate for enrollment in that program still is not broken 30%.
When
Now,
you say acceptance rate, acceptance by who? By the client?
The defendants.
Okay.
The defendants themselves. So what I'm trying to tell you, which is difficult for people to hear, because it's contrary to the narrative, because usually the narrative is it's prosecutors and police officers who don't support diversion. And what I'm telling you in this county, that is not the case. What I do not understand, and I'd love to have an explanation, I don't have an explanation for you, which is if I'm offering to get someone into treatment and into a program that will result in their sobriety, their exit from the criminal justice system, putting their lives back together, and no felony charge, why is the acceptance rate under 30%? In other jurisdictions in this state, for example, the southern part of the state, they have acceptance rate 60, 70, 80% in that same program. So what is it about Bernalillo County that there is an incentive created in not accepting an offer of help from a prosecutor who's willing to extend that offer? Because you're exactly right. I'm not trying to send people who have substance abuse issues and who are not violent to a place where they're going to get worse, they're not going to get treated, and they're going to impact community and harming people. That's not why I became a prosecutor. But everyone needs to have the facts and understand that there are a lot of us who are trying to do this diversion work, and we're not getting a lot of assistance
And they're
from other parts
choosing
of the system.
jail instead. Or
They're
prison
choosing to
instead.
just move forward with their case. And in most other jurisdictions, they wouldn't make that choice, but I don't know why they're making it here.
Danielle, one more in the back.
Can I just jump in real quick while I want to get to the questions, but one of the things that I didn't touch on that I think is important from the federal system that we have largely overlooked in this district is we don't really have a reentry program set up for people when they get out of federal prison. And so while we have much more success in securing long terms of incarceration, I think your point is a very good one, which is, what are we doing? I mean, people are released as they should be released, and what can we do to help better position them? And we have federal probation officers, and we have supervised release. But and Mr. Baez agrees with this, as prosecutors, we have a role to play in the reentry, and so we're working on it. It's not set up yet, but I think that's an important point to make sure that we are providing what we can do to help that reentry, to kind of help stop the cycle. And so more to come on that. Welcome your opinions and thoughts. But I thought that was important to your point, so I didn't mean to cut into the question.
One more question. Hello. Yes, I have a question. So, again, I am a recovering addict and have felonies as well. Why, since we have peer support in the community now, why don't we have a panel of peer support workers or people that have been there, done that, and get ideas from us if we are working as a community? I see a lot of people up there, but what about the people that have broken the addiction, have been through the system? Get ideas from us so that we can help our community get back to where it needs to be, or just have us help other people. We are willing to help. Us wraparound programs. Why is there not something in MDC, the prisons, like 30 days before you get out, helping people put a plan of action together, letting them get resources that they need, or where they're going to go, whether it be CCP, drug court. Let them get the resources so they can have a plan of action. They know where they're going. They know who they're talking to. They have the point of contact. They have the person they need to reach out to. That's what really needs to be put in those jails, especially MDC. And peer support workers are willing to work with our people to get them back on the right track. I can help you because I'm going to share what I've been through, how I got my kids back, how I put my life back together. And coming from peer support workers, we can help this community.
So if I could real briefly, I think that's an excellent point, and Young Adult Court has built in a peer support program, and you will see some of them around here today. They're actually present here helping out at the summit, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's one thing for someone like me to get up here and talk about what I know and what I've experienced versus somebody who's walked in your shoes and has lived that experience. So our Young Adult Court encourages our graduates to stay on as peer mentors. They do all kinds of things for our participants, whether it be a phone call, drive them to an appointment, help them with childcare. Just be there as someone that they can call who's had that experience. So 100% agree with you. We could use more of that.
All right. Thank you so much to the panelists for coming on. It got a little bit heated there in the end, but I think these are important discussions. Thank you to the audience for participating in that. You really helped out.
And thank you so much to Danielle for doing this. As you can see, this is not a one-answer topic, is it? We don't have one answer. You can't just take the pills off the street and be done. It doesn't work that way, right? Okay, thank you very much. You all very informative. Thank you so much.